This is Chapter 2 of Glorious, Part 1 of Awakening, perspective of Rayner Jace.
Waking up, there were two things I knew for sure. One, that I definitely wasn't at the high school anymore. And two, that I really needed some eye drops. The one thing I definitely wasn't sure about was why my arms were moving without effort. I could feel them waving in the air, a voice whispering from next to me. "It's like those two men from those car dealerships." The voice sounded familiar enough, like the kid that used to bunk down at Tegan's place. For a brief second, I wondered if that was where I was, but opening my eyes revealed a scene I hadn't been expecting. It had been a few years since I had seen a government ship, but it was unmistakably a version of them. Bolting upright, I took a moment to realize that wherever I was, it wasn't being held by the government. There was no way they would allow a kid like Austin on board, let alone into a room where they were keeping me. "Austin, where are we?" I asked him, watching as his hands dropped from where they had been holding my arms up in the air. If it wasn't somewhere safe, we had a very short window before they realized I was awake, therefore a very small window to escape. Tegan was going to kill me if this kid didn't make it out of here alive. He stood up clumsily, sitting on the couch next to me, which brought my attention to the fact that we were on a couch, of all things. If this was, by chance, a government ship, then why didn't they have me locked up? "I actually go by Blazer now. Mom helped me reclaim myself," he said, nodding his head and looking proud of himself. He still didn't answer my question. I didn't even have the energy to ask again, and he seemed to notice as I stared at him. "We're on the Vital, man. Don't worry about it. But I should let them know you're awake. I promised." "The Vital?" I wondered, closing my eyes and wincing. It felt like razors on the back of my eyelids with how dry they were. Blazer looked around them with a smile on his face. "Yeah, man, the Vital. It's her name." "Who names a ship Vital?" I wondered out loud. "She's vital to us, man. She keeps us together." I never understood him, but in moments like these, he seemed to make even less sense. Blazer got to his feet, and I watched as he walked to the door. "I'll go let them know you're up." I winced again at the uncomfortable feeling behind my eyelids. "Hey, Blazer, do you think you could find me some eye drops too?" Enthusiastically, he shot some finger guns my way. My mood shifted as I watched him. If he was on the ship, and so was I, Tegan was going to rip into me for even letting it happen. He was a kid, only a little bit older than my brother was the last time I saw him. "You can count on me," he said as he backed out of the room, guns still blazing. I could hear him walking down the hall, and as his footsteps faded, I got to my feet, holding on to the back of the couch. Whatever those girls had given me, they had really done a number on my body. I felt like I had after the beatings when I was young, which was an achievement here. I had to hand that to them. I remembered waking up once, my stomach churning, but I had fallen back to sleep quickly, with minimal energy to move. I didn't even make it far this time before I had to sit down on another chair. There was the sound of footsteps coming closer once again, this time with multiple sets of feet. The door opened, and there she was, the red-headed demon, who held the secrets to making me feel like I had been hit by a train. The logical part of me knew that was a harsh judgment, but as I saw her stand in front of me with her hands on her hips, it was the one thing that popped into my clouded mind. "Eye drops?" I asked. Blazer was right behind her, the miracle bottle clenched in his hands. Sorry, Karri, I promised. I can't break a promise. She didn't protest, but her eyes didn't leave mine for a moment. Once my eyes didn't feel like they were being scorched by hot irons, I was able to look at her properly. She definitely looked different than she did at school, in a casual outfit instead of following a strict dress code. Even though I wasn't thrilled to see her there, I could admire the fact that she was an attractive person. It just wouldn't be allowed to go further than that. Do you feel like explaining why I'm here, or are you just going to keep staring? She looked taken aback that I had said that, and I realized I had dropped the facade from school, the one I had put up specifically so no one wanted to try and get to know me. I had wanted isolation. I hadn't wanted to get close to anyone. I couldn't handle any more pain of loss. Somehow, though, I had managed to attract the adventurous type who were willing to quite literally steal a person. I noticed her walk to the door, ushering Blazer out before closing it and returning to where I was, sitting on a chair across from me.
You're here because we needed an extra set of hands. You seemed like you might have been good for the job.
So you didn't think to ask nicely? I lifted an eyebrow, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees as I watched her. She leaned back, crossing her arms under her chest. I moved forward. She moved back. Like a dance of avoidance.
Would you have agreed?
She wondered. Her voice was harsh, almost unwelcoming. But I could tell she was nervous being there with me. There was something about her that seemed so familiar. I knew I couldn't force a memory that wasn't there, but I couldn't help wondering why I felt her familiarity so strongly. As frustrating as it was my own fault for staying away from home too long. The answer to your question was, I never had the chance to be in that moment. Honestly, I don't have an answer for you now. She lifted her arms to both sides and shrugged. This conversation wasn't getting us very far. Why me then? Out of all the people in that town, why me?
I just had a feeling. You don't have to stay, but if you want to, then welcome to the Vital.
She got to her feet.
There's a little kitchen in that room to your left if you're hungry or thirsty.
Just like that, the conversation was over. She had decided to kidnap someone on a hunch, and I really had no idea how to feel about that. Not only that, but the fact she had succeeded, I had every reason to want to leave as soon as I possibly could and never look back. Part of me, however, thought that even if it wasn't what I had asked for, it may have been the adventure I needed. As Karri was leaving the room, she paused and turned to stare at me. The look in her eyes had changed. Although it had been demanding and almost stern, it was now concerned.
Rayner?
I acknowledged, curious about where this was going. She shook her head over ever so slightly.
You mentioned some things in your sleep. Who's Jake?
The name brought my attention to her quickly. She looked almost sad for a moment, then tried to hide it. I wasn't sure why that was something that stood out to her. What do you mean? I wondered. She turned to fully face me, leaning against the wall by the door with her arms crossed. She was trying to look cool and composed, but it really wasn't working.
When I brought you in here, you grabbed my wrist and said the name. It just seemed strange, that's all.
It was clear she had more to say, but I wasn't about to pry into the personal life of a girl I didn't even know beyond a few words exchanged in a school hallway. Jake's my younger brother. He's still living back home. I shrugged it off. I didn't need to mention the details, not to her. Those were spared for people that knew me well enough, and the only person I had trusted that to in the past few years had been Tegan. That didn't seem to convince Karri too well, but I could tell she wasn't about to fight it. I didn't know what exactly she wanted to know about my brother, but I wasn't going to give that information out willingly.
Great.
She spoke, still sounding unsure.
Well, once you've adjusted, I'll have Gabby show you what she needs from you around here.
She left before I had the chance to speak again. The whole situation was strange, but made stranger by her question about my brother. Why the name Jake would have been the word to stick with her, I had no idea. It was a common name around here, even if not where we were from. I was quite sure it had come from my mom, although I wasn't sure where she had heard it to begin with. It was a few hours before I had the energy to move much. I did manage to take in some of what Gabby brought for me to eat and drink, but didn't have much of an appetite and still wasn't up for leaving the room I was in. When I finally did, I found it strange to be on board such a large ship that was so quiet. Normally, they were bustling with people to run it. How were Gabby and Karri intending on running it with so few people? As far as I was aware, it was just her, myself, Gabby, and Blazer. That didn't seem too efficient. They must have had more people who just hadn't come into the picture yet.
Hey, Slade?
A voice spoke over the intercom, and I recognized it was Gabby.
We could use a hand in the control room if you've got a minute. We're about to enter into some trouble.
Slade. She had mentioned knowing him. With Karri's last name being Ryder, it wasn't unbelievable to think he would be around. But it was strange. There was the sound of a door slamming shut behind me, and I turned to see him. Sure, I had seen him on TV in the past, but he was far larger in person. He was taller than me even, and had the muscle to go with it. "Are you going to stand there, kid?" he asked in a gruff tone as he rushed toward the control room. "She's going to need you in there too. Prove you're some kind of use and not just another damn mouth to feed." He disappeared, on his way to find them. It definitely wasn't the kind of reaction I was expecting from the famous Slade Ryder, but I would take it. I wasn't really one for much small talk either. At least I tried not to be. We could get along decently. I followed despite being unsure about the whole situation, and as I did, I realized we were in no imminent danger. It was rough flying, but we weren't going to die. It must have been their first time going through it, though, because Gabby looked flustered running back and forth. Slade rushed forward, taking some of the controls from her smoothly and gesturing for her to go to her place. I could tell Karri had never been in this kind of situation before either, but she was better at hiding it than Gabby seemed to be. She remained calm and collected, but her eyes betrayed her along with the glow of sweat along her forehead. She was nervous, but as she looked towards me, that faded.
Jace, I need you on the... Oh, God.
Karri hesitated, trying to find the right word, and if we really had been in a bad situation, that hesitation would have been what killed us rather than Gabby's frantic running around. Slade turned to face her, ready to jump in at any moment if needed.
Damn it!
She mumbled to herself before looking like it had just come to her.
The stabilizer!
At her words, Slade's stare turned into a look of confusion, as if he didn't understand what a stabilizer was. I looked to the left of the control room, quickly finding what she was talking about and going to man it. I wasn't about to leave them hanging. If we were going down, I was going down with them. I looked back at the others as I worked, seeing Gabby looking confused and Slade looking... The only way to describe how he was looking was furious. Shaking my head, I turned back to my work. She had made it clear where I was needed, and if they wanted to give new orders, they were allowed.
All right.
Gabby spoke a couple of minutes later once the vital had settled back into her normal flow.
Thanks for jumping in, Rayner, although I'm not sure...
Slade cut her off. "Karri, I need your help in the engine room so this doesn't happen again."
Slade, I could give you a hand. I'd be more help in there.
Gabby spoke with a happy tone.
I'd be happy to help.
Slade, however, wasn't having it. No, Karri needs to learn anyways. His eyes turned to me and I could see him seething. So he wasn't just short on small talk with me. There was something more behind that anger. I just needed to figure out what it was. Karri rolled her eyes.
Slade, that's not my job.
Stop arguing for once and do as you're told. He turned his frustrated look to her and she backed down rather quickly. She knew his limits better than most, I was sure of it. The guy hadn't even properly met me, and he was already despising me. He turned back to me for a moment and nodded, still looking pissed. Your roots are showing. Do you need to go to a salon? I reached up to touch my hair, as if I could feel the change in color. Of course, I had been out for a few days and my hair had already been beginning to show then. Slade put his arm around Karri's shoulder to lead her out of the control room. He didn't look back at me again.
I don't know how you got stabilizer out of what Karri said, but I'm glad you understood her.
Gabby exclaimed, then saw the shocked expression on my face.
Don't worry about Slade. He's just grouchy.
I looked at Gabby. She was so tiny next to Slade, and he had temper problems, clearly. It was concerning, to say the least. Even Karri could have been really hurt by him if he decided to go off the rails. I'm not worried about Slade, I told her. I'm more worried about you two with Slade. Gabby laughed, a sound that could have made even the angriest of people smile. It reminded me of when I was young, when my mother would laugh, just full of kindness.
Don't worry about us. He's rough, but he's weak for his girls. It looks like he's just worried about Karri.
What does he have to be worried about?
Well, that's his little sister, and she chose you to come with us. He's probably worried she won't need him or something ridiculous like that.
Gabby smiled at me and winked.
Are you planning on stealing her away?
Well, I'm pretty sure she already did that with me. Slade should really be more worried about Karri's kidnapping habit and effective way of achieving it. I spoke with an attempt at humor, and Gabby seemed to pick up on it decently enough. It was refreshing and peaceful after the company I had been with so far. Just a fun conversation, even if a bit strange. Gabby went back to the controls, inputting a few things.
I'll just put her in autopilot. I doubt Karri has shown you around, and I saw Blazer go to his room.
If I knew Blazer, he wouldn't really stay in a room of his own. Even when he stayed with Tegan, he had struggled to stay in a room unless someone else was there. I had a feeling he had just found a corner somewhere to lay down and chosen that as his space. Hopefully, given time, I could convince him that he wasn't going to upset anyone by choosing a proper room to sleep in. I had always had a soft spot in my heart just for him. A few years had gone by since I last saw Blazer. He didn't seem to have changed all that much, except for the fact he seemed more confident in himself. Sure, I responded to Gabby. Then I realized she was still staring up at me and waiting for me to answer. Yes, I could use a tour. She smiled at me, and when she started walking, it was almost like a bounce with each step. She didn't even need to try. She was just the happy type of person that you hoped the world never ruined. If anyone on the Vital was going to be difficult to not grow close to, it was going to be her. Brushing the thought away from my mind, I followed her out of the room. I didn't need to think about that. I had learned over the years how to not get attached to people, even though I was quite bad at putting that into practice.
Well, you've seen everything from the common area to the control room,
Gabby exclaimed, turning to look at me as she patted the door with her hand. It slid open at the touch. Catching her off guard, I reached out instinctively, grabbing her hand to hold her steady so she wouldn't fall into the room. I couldn't even help but chuckle at the shocked look on her face as she realized she hadn't hit the floor. Are you all right? I wondered as I helped her steady herself.
I knew the doors reacted to touch, but I'm so used to opening doors that I didn't even think.
She looked a bit embarrassed. The common places on the ship were set to react to touch. Often, people were carrying supplies or even parts through many of the common doors, and they had used these particular models as a test run. There were a few reasons the doors didn't work in practice, and Gabby had just discovered the main reason. Don't worry about it. That's a huge flaw in this ship. It's one of the main reasons it didn't work as a military ship. If others managed to get on, those rooms would be the first targets. I waved it off, trying to make her feel less embarrassed. She seemed like one of the most sane people on this ship, even if she had been part of my kidnapping. She looked excited as I released her hand now that she was stable on her feet.
Oh, wait a second. You know about this model?
I've done some research. I couldn't exactly tell her everything. She wouldn't even believe it all if I could. I went through a bit of a phase, I guess. I know about a few different models.
So you don't actually need me to show you around?
She asked cautiously, not sure of how much I knew. I shrugged slightly. No, please do. I know about the model, but it's been quite some time since I've seen one. I'd love to see your plans for it.
Until next time, just keep those finger guns blazing, and we love you.